That's awesome.
Entitled Equality and Economic Development. We have two presenters today, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce George. He's going to talk for a little while, and then Younghan will talk, and then we'll open it up for questions. My name is Carrie Hardin, and I am a PhD student here at UNC Chapel Hill. So George Scheer is one of my colleagues. He's executive director and co-founder of Elsewhere, a living museum set inside a former thrift store located in Greensboro, North Carolina. George is a writer, scholar, and artist who fosters creative communities at the intersection of aesthetics and social change. He holds an MA in critical theory and visual culture from Duke University, which is all right, and a BA in political communication.
Wow. Okay. How do we actually get to the presentation on here?
Did you boot your presentation into it?
I don't know, I sent it to Armand.
Where's Armand? Okay.
Done.
Can you send it to yourself?
Yeah. See how this works. Everyone comes into my email. Do you want it?
Or here, we can go blank if you don't want to.
No.
I can fill a little airtime. That really was a joke. We have a fantastic relationship with Duke University in many, many ways, institutional, social, and otherwise. But we kind of have to live up to the stereotype, so when the opportunity presents itself.
What? Well, he actually has a PowerPoint too, so yeah.
And I'll be as quick as possible, and I apologize.
Okay, that's actually a good idea. I will go ahead and introduce Younghan, and that way we don't have dead air while we make the technology equal what we want it to. So Younghan Cho is going to go second, and he's actually a former colleague, assistant professor in the Graduate School of International and Area Studies at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, Seoul, Korea. He received his PhD degree in communication studies from this university, and was a postdoctoral fellow in the Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore. Dr. Cho's research interests include media and cultural studies, global sports and nationalism, and East Asian pop culture and modernity, internet ethnography in Asian context as well. His papers have appeared in numerous journals, including Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, Media, Culture and Society, and Cultural Studies. Dr. Cho has recently co-edited volumes entitled Colonial Modernity and Beyond, East Asian Context, and a special issue of Cultural Studies, American Pop Culture in Asia, and a special issue in Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, and Globalization of Sports in Asia, and a special issue of Sociology of Sport Journal. Welcome.
Do you want me to dim the lights a little bit? Yep.
So, thank you, everybody. All right. So, thank you. I wanted to consider this morning Project Row House, a community arts organization based in Houston's 3rd Ward. It's a well-studied case. It has helped define an emerging field of contemporary art project spaces that are offering what I think are unique models combining urban development, artistic practice, community equity. Project Row House offers an introduction to a broader field of inquiry into art spaces addressing urban and cultural concerns through aesthetic means. The founding story, as told by founder Rick Lowe, illustrates well how an individual artistic motivation transforms both the context for artistic practice and the potential for community development work. There are a lot of projects emerging at the intersection of community development and art. The Heidelberg Project in Detroit, whose mission is to improve the under-resourced and horribly blighted Detroit community where the project was founded. Black Cinema House in Hyde Park, Chicago, which provides screenings and discussions for underseen works by film and video makers of the African and other diasporas of the historically underserved neighborhood of Grand Crossing. York, Alabama's Coleman Arts Center, which uses art to foster positive social change, answer civic needs, and build local pride and use creativity for community problem solving. These are sort of mission statements of what these different organizations are. Rebuild Foundation, which is actually the same guy that runs Black Cinema House. This is in East St. Louis and operates as a, quote, creative engine focusing on cultural and economic redevelopment and affordable space initiatives in under-resourced communities. And Wonder Root in Atlanta, in the former Milltown of East Atlanta, which is providing production facilities for Atlanta-based artists to, quote, empowering artists to be proactive, engaging communities through arts-based service work. So, as best we can in the time allotted to consider, I wanted to consider Project Row House's narrative, which is one of the earliest in the field of art and development projects, founded in '94, and which layers an individual art project, a public art exhibition space, an artist residency, an architecture research lab, a young mothers housing community, a community development corporation, building low-income housing, and which is now poised to launch new ventures and community-based small business initiatives, all operative in its third ward neighborhood. As we explore equality and equity in art and development practices, I wanted to provisionally define a few terms as well. By equity, I mean the process and potential for resource collection and exchange between artists and the communities they're engaging with. And by equality, I mean the relative balance of resources held between communities and the cultural, political, and economic structures that determine the principles of these exchanges. So to give a grounding, I want to also show a quick trailer from the documentary Third Ward, Texas, which was created by filmmaker Andrew Garrison and sort of documents the process. How do I now jump out of here?
Hit escape.
Okay, great.
This student, high school student, came in and, he said, but while your work hits on all the issues that are relevant to communities, low-income communities, people in those communities already know what the issues are. We don't need people to come back and tell us what the issues are. We already know. We see it. We live it. It's like, if you're an artist and you're creative, why can't you create some kind of solution?
When Project Row House, this neighborhood was reborn. It was reborn because all of these houses was drug infested, and when they took over and did what they did, it just opened up, and it was just like a new day.
There were those tough periods though when, maybe one weekend there would be 25, 30 people, and the next weekend you show up and there's me and Jesse, or something, or me and Bird, or something, but there was still this sense that, this thing's going to happen.
Last night we were working and people were walking up and down the street, somebody's on a bicycle, dogs are barking. It's a different kind of setting. I think just daily people walk by and they'll have accessibility to art.
The people in the neighborhood are really great, and it's like when you open the doors, people just come through, and I guess they're used to walking through, but it's so easy for them to walk through too, and they just talk to you.
Okay, thank you.
We could possibly think of the world as this big sculpture, in that, it's being shaped all the time. If we're careful about how it's shaped, we can determine, what it looks like.
that is a very, it's a very happy and positive look at the project, which it deserves that in a lot of ways. So that's Project Row House's founder, Rick Lowe, who I met with last month and had the fortune of taking a tour of the project with him. And like in the video, he actually told me the same story of the project's founding, a story that is now a rehearsed myth. He said, I want to figure out how to be a contributor to this neighborhood. At the time, and this is back in the early 90s, I was doing sculpture and paintings around political and social issues in the neighborhood, and at certain points started doing installations where I organized press conferences. And I did one around police brutality. And there I was hosting a group of students, and one of the students said, Mr. Lowe, while your paintings and sculptures show stuff that's happening in our neighborhood, we don't need that. We already know what's happening in our neighborhood. We need solutions. You're an artist. Can't you create solutions? And so this founder's myth is about the transformation, in some sense, of the artist in relationship to their own ideas, the social structures, and the communities which operate inside of the cities. And rather than arts being a tool of simple record, or expression of community trauma, or a means of creating dialogue, or cathartic expression, or communal cohesion of some other effective voice, the artist as maker extends their practice beyond the discursive and towards physical, institutional, and material change. The artist as, think of it this way, the artist as organizer or activist, as developer that signals a fundamental shift in the demand of aesthetic discourse towards function, practice, accumulation of resource, constituency builder, lightning rod for capital and labor. It is in this framework that we can consider how equity and the exchange of resources between artists and communities operate. So Lowe's story continues. During the period while he was trying to reconceive the role of the artists, he went on a tour with city officials in the 3rd Ward, and they discussed plans to tear down the abandoned row houses. In a 4-block area, only 3 buildings were occupied, and it was an impulse of the city planners to demolish and rebuild. In connection with John Biggers, whose work this is, an African-American artist who started the art department at Texas Southern University and whose own paintings depicted a fascination with the West African roots of row house architecture. Lowe began organizing and conceptualizing how to take these properties that the city deemed blighted and valueless and transform them as a place for artists to create new work. I would argue that the desire to discover new value in derelict property grew out of a more general artistic sensibility, a pragmatic aesthetics, a material interest, a curiosity in connecting making and material practice with a concept and inquiry, and even a history, if you can think Duchamp's ready-mades. Here, the row house itself becomes an artistic medium, inclusive of the neighborhood's own needs, the skills of its members, the available resources of wood, porch, floorboard, facade, awning, each utilized toward the fostering of artistic work and resulting in different combinations of social, political, and economic equity. Simultaneously, the innovation of social sculpture also serves to innovate upon the urban development process and send different message than a renovation, one that has social context to the city on a larger scale. And the picture here, actually, that little yellow box, so one of the questions they had to figure out was how do we upfit an old row house? If we can gut them for pretty cheap, how do we actually upfit them for modern amenities that people could live in? And so the picture previously actually shows they basically could prefab kitchen bathroom units. They work with Rice University to prefab kitchen and bathroom units and then basically insert them into the sides of these row houses. And this is something that you see around this neighborhood that he's kind of building. So the first iteration of the exhibition program of Project Row House was called Drive-By. This is not Drive-By, this is let's put it up here. This is one of the current resident projects. Drive-By, in which local artists created murals and paintings on the front of houses, visible to people as they drove by. The strategy was simple: to get people from outside the community to come into a neighborhood, to take notice, to make visible the site which had been deemed valueless. The hook, Drive-By, which Lowe described as perfect, plays on the image of 90s gangster rap and a headline for media, an easy, edgy interface for city center communities, and a satire or stereotyping, depending on how you like to look at it, of the image of poverty, crime, and inner city justice. But as a tactic, it was effective, and it produced interest and literally drove traffic to the place that no one cared for. The exhibition of public artwork is in a very unlikely place, created visibility for the site capable of becoming a currency of value for the neighborhood simply by insisting that the somethingness of what was already there existed. In the material remnants of a vacant neighborhood with serious derelict properties, the presence of falling apart row houses signal the psychological, cultural, and historical remains that now are read as available material and architectural resource for community building in a landscape of post-industrial decline. At the same time, Lowe was cleaning up these houses and realized that minus the labor, it only cost $4,500 to renovate one house. So by all accounts, it took months to get one of the 22 houses complete. And about this time, Lowe came in contact with the director of the Menil Collection, a museum of philanthropic commitments to Houston. And the Menil director liked the project, felt the cost was right, but the time completion was too long. And so the Menil director designed a plan to pledge $4,500 to give his employees, and to give his employees Mondays off to work on the row houses. And then challenged the Museum of Art and the Contemporary, and so on, into what became the House Challenge. And this was sort of this third or the second big thing, a community building competition between artists, arts and cultural organizations throughout Houston. And again, not a lot of resource, just a lot of labor, and they renovated all 22 houses. And these are just pictures a little bit as I go through. You can kind of see of one of the installations that currently is in the house. They change over all the time. So the question emerges how labor is valued in the, quote, service of community development and art. In part, the community subsidizes the material labor through an assumed contract in which that community maintains ownership of its neighborhood. The assumption of ownership is connected in part to the process, which generates buy-in around the social and cultural capital, but also ownership is connected to the nonprofit, which comes to assume the place of the artist through an organizational entity that maintains the social contract alongside the service contract with the state. Interestingly, Lowe noted that the majority of the $4,500 went to the payment of electrical and plumbing services. So in this instance, trained professional labor and materials mandated and certified by the state remain strictly bound to the values determined by the marketplace and trade, while untrained labor and available time assume a much greater balance of risk for the community, and is driven by the proposition of future equity in the form of job creation, property value increases, decreased criminal activity, and social well-being. So today, Project Row House is about to open its 38th round of artist installations. In 12 of the original 22 row houses, programmed as artist residency and installation sites, where artists can come in and do anything they want, basically. Adjacent of the original 22 houses are used for, 22 of the houses are used for, 7 of the 22 houses, sorry, are used for low-income housing for young mothers between the ages of 18 and 26. These women interface with the residency program, share backyards and common spaces. And according to Project Row House's website, these women pay $75 to $250 for residence in a fully furnished row house with rent subsidy for 1 or 2 years. And they have access to weekly workshops on budget, finance, parenting, computer skills, job readiness, and healthy relationships provided by mentors. The site also notes that this payment falls short of approximately $9,500 per month in direct costs to Project Row House for the housing, utilities, childcare, and workshops. These are houses, so in addition, they also now run the CDC, Community Development Corporation, which is building these duplexes, which is another sort of program. So it would require a much closer analysis of the budget. And again, I see these in a larger context of other projects happening both in the US, but also in Europe as well. Closer analysis of budgets to understand the funding flows between the residency and the Young Mothers Program particularly, not to mention the separate CDC, which is a whole other nonprofit. What direct costs are associated with each and how these costs subsidize through language of social impact, determine the coalition of arts, justice, state and federal block grants, private support, and other resources that flow funding to the nonprofit to disperse in the community. Another direction for this research is to consider what cultural infrastructures are emerging at this moment in the early 90s. Hope 6 development program, which utilizes new urbanist architectural principles to revitalize housing projects, began concurrently with Project Row House in 1992. At the same time, in the early 90s, certain relational and participatory forms of artistic practice were beginning to emerge internationally, distinctive from public art and community art as active in urban centers. Furthermore, a history of art founded project spaces were now fully the paradigm of the 90s. These sort of like, begin to think Warhol's factory meets, well, there's many spaces in New York, particularly the project spaces. They set the groundwork for collective coalitions of artists presenting exhibitions of new work in quasi-public-private spaces. In this sense, Project Row House utilizes the arts infrastructure of well-capitalized networks alongside the development models of urban housing to reconfigure, rearrange, remix the role of arts vis-a-vis the community. The solution that Lowe presented, the saving of a derelict row houses, initially through art installations, is quite physical and material, but also curatorial, administrative, and built upon a new discourse for the visionary artist, iterating upon the institutional forms rather than objects. So further questions that in this research that I might bring forward, are the models active in this larger field of art and development practice reproducible, franchisable, or only associable according to specific site locations and geosocial situations in which they emerge? How has the market crash since 2008 changed funding and creative focuses towards commercial and small business interests, job creation, and housing? Have new tools been innovated to measure effective impact and capital flows, and for which institutional economies have these tools been crafted? How do we truly contend with the principles of labor, which seem unbalanced and driven by a fundamental undervaluing of the cultural worker and their ready willingness to leverage resource and risk against promise of community ownership? And we might also ask, how has the artist been co-opted into the role of cultural worker, and what infrastructures and institutions have shifted within the under-resourced neighborhood that has created space for curious alliances between artists, activists, planners, nonprofits, and developers. And so in conclusion, I would simply note that the field of art and development is only growing. Every year, new funding networks emerge. Massive coalitions between global foundations like Ford, Open Society, Kresge, Warhol, and the National Endowment for the Arts, just to name a few, are directing money into projects that use art for development purposes. On a local level, municipalities, especially those emerging from post-industrial cities affected by NAFTA, are embroiled in downtown revitalization efforts and are using art and placemaking discourse to leverage money, resources, labor into lifestyle infrastructures like greenways, pedestrian plazas, and performing arts centers in an effort to stimulate new urban economies founded ultimately on cultural tourism, which I'll just note, this one's funny. The day we visited, that's Quincy Jones' son, who was doing a film of him, so there was like this weird handoff in the tour where suddenly like I left with this foundation woman that was also touring, and at the same time Quincy Jones' son was showing up, and it was this kind of weird moment. So cultural tourism has become like central to this whole thing. And what remains critical to this moment and key to the equitable solution in the sense that Lowe was challenged to produce is the balance formed between artists' role as innovator and instigator and the community's share in the ownership and advancement of the material cultural assets present in the neighborhood.
That works. You can click close tabs. It's very slow.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it open?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, thank you for having me. This conference gave me a good reason to revisit the campus where I spent 5 years of my life. And as you see from the title, the context of my presentation is totally different from the other sections. It's basically about South Korea per se, but fortunately or not, it seems that Korea is broadcast in every corner of this program in the United States. Although my topic is not about North Korea. And yeah, actually, yeah, so I hope that my presentation will be expanding your some information of knowledge of some situation of South Korea and try to connect my question of some changing landscape of political situation under new liberalized South Korea into more global or East Asian situations. I'm from South Korea, and this paper investigates the emergence of the ideas of equality as the key political campaign within the recent political election in South Korea. Particularly after 2011 and 12, welfare issues are emerging as the key political campaigns. The examples are free school meals, free child care, and the half price tuition, and finally the idea of economic democratization. After 2008 global crisis, it is often argued that the myth of neoliberalization is finally over, particularly in the context of European countries and United States. Such a situation made me wonder whether it is same with South Korea or East Asia, which underwent very intensive and very compressed industrialization within the short time of period. So I want to ask such a changing landscape with the changing agenda and the changing kind of the political economic situation in the globe. So these studies explore why and how the welfare policies could emerge as the key political issues from the South Korea, which has been intensively neoliberalized since 1997, when the country suffered from economic crisis. And in so doing, I think of the implications of such changes in relation to other ideas or ideologies such as developmentalism and neoliberalism. So, in order to that, this session briefly reviews some changes or transformation of South Korea from the development regime to neoliberalization with focus on 1990s. And I'm going to define this new liberal conjuncture as developmental neoliberalization. As some of you might know, South Korea grew economically between the 1960s and the 1980s under a developmental regime, which highlighted the central role of government in the economy and the militarized condition and very mobilized people and purpose-driven mentality, among others. In the 1990s, however, such a development regime came to be less effective as it was, and new liberalizing process has begun, particularly when South Korea joined OECD and WTO in the mid-1990s. Soon after, the economic crisis happened, and the South Korean government had to accept the reform prescribed by IMF because South Korea had to get the money for overcoming the economic crisis. And he is the previous president named Kim Dae-jung. Kim Dae-jung government, which was elected in 1998, which after the crisis was the only regime agent who did and could exercise the new liberal reform. So in this sense, the new liberalization in South Korea had been driven by the government in relation or in alliance with the IMF. At the same time, in South Korea, neoliberalization is also pursued as a political project, and neoliberalization be regarded as the object of popular desire. Several important changes have been made or decided based not only on the economic reason, but also on the political purposes. For instance, in 1996, Kim Young-sam government advertised the joining of OECD in relation to its own campaign, 세계화. It means the globalization. In the new millennium, South Korea is the most active advocate for FTAs. And after 2000, South Korea signed FTAs with some big economic powers, such as European Union, India, and the United States. And the government publicized that FTA is the only way for Korea to reach the first world. So meanwhile, people who had been a bit suppressed under authoritarian government and the development regime accepted or even embraced the idea of neoliberalization as an unavoidable path for overcoming the economic crisis as well as pursuing further development. So neoliberalization and the related discourses are presented as the ladder by which both South Korea and the Koreans could reach the developed country. So in my previous study, I referred to such a conjuncture as developmental neoliberalization. By this, I highlight not only that the government is crucially involved in such an economic transformation, but also that neoliberalization is pursued as another developmentalist project and as the object of the people's desire. And probably the election of the new president, his name is Lee Myung-bak, as the president in 2008, signaled the peak of neoliberalization in South Korea. He is a former CEO of Hyundai. Do you drive the car by Hyundai? And Hyundai is one of the biggest conglomerates in South Korea. The president, MB, deployed neoliberalism as the key election pledge. So his economic policy highlights the market principle with advocating the model of business friendly. His election slogan was summarized as reaching to 747 through tax cut, deregulation, and the strict application of law, which are the general tendency of the neoliberalization. Here, 747 means to reach 7% growth of GDP and to reach $40,000 per capita income and to reach seventh rank in the world economy in his own term. I mean, it's just kind of joke. None of the presidents could accomplish such a goal. However, such a political slogan had really appealed to the people, and he was elected as the election with the hope that he would drive South Korea into such a 747 level. However, the intensive neoliberalization is not solution to the social issues such as polarization of populace. Although per capita income gradually increased after the economic crisis in 1997, the income gaps have grown, the numbers of temporary workers and unemployed, particularly among the youth and the female, have increased, and the numbers of the middle class have plummeted. The failure of the neoliberal reform not only resulted in growing economic inequality, but also made people discontent with the current changes. One remarkable symptom was the public protest against MB government of decision of importing US beef. He made a photo with George Bush in 2008. And people really went to the street. And this is the pictures from the protest against the MB's government. It was directly driven by the government decision of importing beef, but this also relates to the government implementing so many neoliberal policies. And it lasted for several months, so millions of people went to the street and squares every weekend. So you can see how big and how intensive. And also the news of the global economic crisis, such as US subprime mortgages crisis and the Occupy Wall Street movement, were represents the limit or failure of the neoliberalization or neoliberal economic system. Such a predicament of neoliberalization, both in South Korea and in globe, became a crucial motivation or crucial background for a changing agenda in the political campaigns in South Korea. The monitor is just gone, so I have to check the PowerPoint. So, to repeat, the crucial agenda in the 97 and the 98 when the MB government was selected were tax cut and real estate development. To the contrary, the recent election between 1998 and 2009 and 2011, welfare policies such as free school meal for the elementary school and free child care under the age of 5 and half-price college tuition came to fore, which also elicited huge debates and controversy both from the conservative and the progressive camp. Between 2009 and 2011, the governing party, which from the MB government, advocates selective welfare policies, while the opposing party suggested the general welfare policies. For instance, the governing party argued that free school meals should be selectively given to the children or students with low-income family first. To the contrary, the opposing party advocated free meal to the every elementary school at the same time. Accordingly, there are huge debates over taking hegemonic discursive position. For instance, conservative media and experts argued that the free school meal equal to anti-patriotic populism, or mob rule, or great economic breakdown, or tax bomb. Meanwhile, the liberal media and experts argue that free school meals should be a part of compulsory education course. So it is the base right as the citizens. And free school meal will be the base for another hope and equality. While people debate pros and cons concerning such welfare policies, the opposing party managed to win the recent election by a small margin. And in other words, the opposing party took the advantage position first in employing such welfare policies. Then the situation has been changed, and such changing agenda seems to exemplify the critical conjuncture in neoliberalization in South Korea. Some polls show that people preferred redistribution to the development first, and people express very deep doubt toward the idea of a trickle-down effect. And in 2012, last year, there were two important elections in South Korea. The first election is for electing the general members of the National Assembly in April, and the other is presidential election in December. Interestingly enough, for both elections, both the governing party and the opposing party chose welfare policies as their key political campaign. Particularly, for the presidential election, all the candidates selected the idea of economic democratization as a catchphrase. Park Geun-hye, as you see from the slide, a candidate from governing party from the MB government, preoccupied the idea or the issue of economic democratization as her key campaign slogan. And all the major candidates pledged to accomplish economic democratization if he or she would be selected as a president. At that time, from their pledge, the economic democratization not only included welfare policies such as free school meal and free child care, but also promised some reformation of Korean conglomerate system, such as the establishment of fair trade, corporate partnership between the conglomerates and the small and medium enterprises, and fostering small business. These are the people who were the major candidates. And the lady in the left is the Park Geun-hye, who has been elected as a president. And the middle is from the opposing party, and the right person is from the independent. Unfortunately, we're not the ruling party, and the Park won both elections by small margin. Particularly for the presidential election, is very hard election. The voter turnout is more than 75%, which is very high compared to the previous election, which was about 60%, which means that this election really attracted people's interest, and people joined in voting. And as you see from the picture, the Park won the election by a small margin. It's about 3% differentiation between the two candidates. In the final section of my presentation, I'm going to discuss the implication of the surge of the economic democratization as the key political campaign and the victory of Park and the governing party in 3 ways, rather than examining what the details of their policy or whether the president have the willingness of accomplishing such a goal. Firstly, the surge of economic democratization in the political agenda certainly indicates that people's increased discontent with neoliberalization, which in turn resulted in changing agenda and the political landscape. New election agendas and the election outcomes clearly demonstrate that welfare policies and the related discourses have appealed to the general people, rather than new liberal policies. So the party who took the hegemonic position in the such a welfare policy won the election too. For the past couple of decades, new liberalization and the social polarization elicited the increased demand for social safety net. As a result, such a welfare issues have been adopted as the political dominant agenda. In turn, such agenda also influenced on the result of the election. It is really first time that such a progressive agenda have appeared as the key issue in the political election. The previous 3 key issues are the development, or the threat from the North Korea, or the unification between South and North. Secondly, the 2012 presidential election demonstrates that the idea of economic democratization functions not as philosophy, not as political philosophy, but as a political strategy. As mentioned, all the candidates commonly chose the economic democratization as the key slogan, and the detailed policies are not different to each other. Although their parties and their individual platforms have been quite different. Particularly the ruling party and the President-elect Park Geun-hye traditionally has followed the idea of trickle-down effect or trickle-down model, not the welfare policy and distribution first. In this sense, Park's welfare policies can be regarded as ad hoc welfareism. In other words, the idea of economic democratization is adopted for winning the election only. Park emphasized that her government would implement the welfare policy without tax boost, which is a bit ironic and I think it's nonsense. And as a result, the welfare discourses, including economic democratization, is highly dependent on the media. It is highlighted as the election propaganda rather than settlement. Media and people tend to highlight what a party or candidate promised as an election pledge, not what they have done before, not whether they could accomplish such a goal. Therefore, there is no guarantee of whether the ruling party would have a strong willingness to accomplish the goal as it promised after the election, and people might not care about it until the next election. Thirdly, the 2012 election tells that the economic democratization in South Korea makes some alliance with the idea of the developmentalism by connecting it with the good growth or virtuous circle for the development. As a political strategy, economic democratization inevitably replaced the role of the neoliberalization in 2008 election, and Park succeeded in the preoccupying this agenda and winning the election. In the final stage of the election, the Park also repeated the political slogan of development, such as "Live Well Again." Particularly, the slogan such as "Live Well" was the kind of representative slogan under the development regime. Actually, the Park Geun-hye is the daughter of the former president Park Chung-hee, who was the president in South Korea between the 1960s and 80s. He was from the military and he seized the power through the coup, and he was regarded as the father of the Korean economic development. And so Park continuously used the image of her father and the economic development under his dictatorship. In so doing, people rarely felt the contradiction or conflict between the idea of the development and the economic democratization. So the 2012 election made crucial conjuncture in South Korea, particularly which pursued very extensive neoliberalization since 1997. While people are suffering from neoliberal changes, some progressive agenda, such as welfare policies and the economic democratization, came to the fore as the key election issues, and even older parties promised to accomplish them during the election period. However, the election outcome and the ways of utilizing the idea of economic democratization also suggests some pessimistic signs, which means that the economic democratization is used simply as another magical mantra, which would make South Korea or Korean citizens rich or winners of such a global competition, as the developmentalism and neoliberalization have done before. So I still suspect that developmentalism still haunts South Korean society. So the 2011 election clearly indicates a rupture in neoliberalization, but this rupture would remain temporary or limited. Thank you.
So I'm just going to say a couple words as moderator about the connections between these two presentations. I think they do exist. And then I'll open it up for questions. I want to go back to